Hi everyone, my name is Alistair Crasto. Today I'll be presenting on the environmental health impacts of Teflon and its associated chemicals, particularly PFAS, also known as forever chemicals. This presentation is for the Global Environmental Health course at NYU. Purpose. The goal of this presentation is to explore how Teflon and PFAS impacts our health and environment. I'll highlight where PFAS contamination has occurred, how people are exposed, what health issues are linked to it, and what policies are being introduced to manage the crisis, all through graphs, maps, and data. Table of content. Here, slide 4 will talk about background. What is Teflon and why is it a concern? Slide 5 will be the map of PFAS contaminated sites. Slide 6 will be the temporal trends of PFAS levels in drinking water. Slide 7 will be the PFAS levels in different US states. Slide 8 will be sources of PFAS exposure. Slide 9 will be the health outcomes by PFAS exposure levels. Slide 10 will be the summary, and slide 11 will be the references. Background. What is Teflon and why is it a concern? So before we get into the data, it is important to understand what Teflon actually is and why is it relevant to environmental health. Teflon is a trade name for polytetrafluoroethylene, or PTFE, a chemical compound discovered in the late 1930s by DuPont. It is best known for making non-stick cookware, but it is also used in a wide variety of products, from waterproof clothing to electronics to industrial machinery. The issue lies in how Teflon is made. It requires PFAS chemicals, especially PFOA, which are known to persist in the environment and the human body for years. These compounds don't break down, which is why they've earned the nickname forever chemicals. Over time, PFAS from Teflon production and disposal have entered drinking water, soil, and even the food chain. This has raised significant public health concerns, which we will explore in the following slides. The map of PFAS contaminated sites in the US. So this map illustrates the data from the Environmental Working Group, which shows over 9,000 known PFAS contamination sites in the US. The highest concentrations are found near military bases, firefighting training centers, and chemical manufacturing plants. It illustrates how PFAS contamination is not just a local issue, but a nationwide issue. MCL stands for Maximum Contaminant Level. A map key. Purple indicates the military sites. Light blue indicates drinking water above the proposed MCL. Dark blue indicates drinking water below the proposed MCL. Orange indicates other known sites. Temporal trends of PFAS levels. The graph on the left shows the actual trends of PFAS levels in the blood serum between 1999 to 2018. From the graph, it is understood that all types of PFAS shows a decrease in the blood serum level over time, as the government had started phasing out the use of PFAS once they realized how bad they are for the health of the people and the environment. The line graph on the right shows simulated but a real trend in PFAS concentration from 2000 to 2020. Studies, including the NHA and ES biomonitoring data and the EPA reports, indicate that PFAS levels have increased until the mid-2000s due to unregulated industrial discharge. PFAS levels in the environment and human bodies were rising in the early 2000s. This was due to widespread industrial use, especially by DuPont and 3M. No major regulatory controls existed at that time, so PFAS contamination grew. From here, you can observe that peak exposure occurred around 2005 to 2007, after which companies began voluntarily phasing out PFOA and PFOS, causing there to be a decline in the concentration. By 2015, PFOA and PFOS were largely phased out in the US manufacturing. In 2006, companies like DuPont joined the EPA's PFOA stewardship program to reduce emission. The EPA regulations and public awareness led to decreasing levels in drinking water and blood samples. However, new PFAS variants are still being detected, so the problem hasn't gone away. PFAS blood levels by state. When selecting sites for exposure assessment, ATSDR looked at three main factors: how widespread the PFOA and the PFOS contamination was in drinking water, how long people might have been exposed, and how many residents could have been affected. The above two graphs show elevated PFOS and PFOA blood levels in residents from 10 PFAS impacted communities. Levels are consistently higher than the national averages, indicating significant exposure from the contaminated drinking water. So longer residency tends to have equal to higher PFAS levels, showing cumulative exposure. Mitigation efforts, like alternative water sources, led to some decline, but PFAS stays in the blood for years, as its half-life is 4 years in the human body. These 10 sites were chosen because they had known PFAS contamination, often from the use of firefighting foam, also known as AFFF. AFFF was used as early as the 1970s by the Air Force and the Air National Guard during firefighting training and emergency responses. Over time, PFAS chemicals from this foam seeped into the ground and made their way into nearby drinking water sources like private wells, municipal supplies, and even surface water. To reduce exposure, various corrective actions were taken. This included removing the contaminated water sources, installing treatment systems, or providing clean alternative waters to residents. Two of the sites were part of the early pilot studies run by state agencies. The remaining 8 were actually led by the ATSDR, each focusing on areas with either known or highly likely PFAS exposures. For community participation, ATSDR used two approaches. At some sites, they randomly selected households to take part. At others, they invited all households to join, which helped them better estimate community-wide exposure, even for people who didn't participate directly. When we compare PFAS blood levels across the country, states like West Virginia and Michigan stand out with higher averages. This is largely due to documented industrial pollution and serious water contamination cases in those regions. These geographic differences in PFAS exposure really highlight how environmental justice, industrial presence, and state-level regulations can all influence public health risks. Sources of PFAS exposures. The above photo shows the various places PFAS is found in. This pie chart on the right breaks down where more PFAS exposure comes from. Food packaging, especially grease-resistant wrappers, accounts for over a third. Contaminated drinking water is another major source. Cookware, particularly old Teflon pans and household dust, also contribute. Industrial emissions are talking about the PFOA present in firefighting foams. This is called the AFFF, which is used by both civilian and military firefighters, which has now been discontinued. This widespread exposure is what makes PFAS such a persistent public health concern. Health outcomes associated with PFAS exposure. PFAS exposure has been linked to several serious health issues. Studies have shown associations with preeclampsia, thyroid disease, kidney and testicular cancer, and immune system suppression. The severity of these outcomes depends not only on the dose and duration of exposure, but also on individual sensitivity, pre-existing health conditions, and environmental factors like access to safe drinking water and quality healthcare. These findings highlight why PFAS are such a pressing public health issue and why regulatory actions is so critical. Summary: Teflon and PFAS contamination is a global health issue. These chemicals persist in our environment and bodies and are linked to serious health outcomes. Regulatory efforts are now underway. For example, in 2024, the Biden administration finalized enforceable drinking water limits for six PFAS compounds. But much more work is needed, especially in addressing contamination in vulnerable communities. References: For the above presentation, the data was interpreted from the above references. All reference articles can be found in the AMF format.